Let x be a number. Translate the English phrase or sentence into a mathematical expression. Then evaluate the expression for x equals -3. So let's be careful to pay attention that this problem, we're being asked to do two different things. So they're asking us to use x for our variable. The first thing they're telling us to do is to translate the English phrase or sentence into a mathematical expression. And then the second thing they're asking us to do is to evaluate. So we want to be sure for each one of these that we do both of those things they're asking us to do. So let's take a look at this first one. 8 less than the number. So remember what we're being asked to do. First, we're being asked to translate this into a mathematical expression. So 8 less than. So certainly the idea of less than means subtraction. We have to be very careful in a problem like this. This less than, if we stop and think about this, if I asked you what's 8 less than 10, 8 less than 10, well, hopefully you could just think about that for a second and say, oh yeah, 8 less than 10 is 2, right? But let's think about how do we come up with 2? Do we do 8 minus 10? No, because if we do 8 minus 10, 8 minus 10 would be -2, right? Because 8 plus a -10, that would give us -2. That's not going to work for us. When we think about 8 less than 10, we start with 10 and then we take 8 away from it. So using this idea, whenever we see this less than, that's always going to do what I call a subtraction flip. We have to be sure that whatever they're telling me that I've got 8 less than the number has to come first, and from that number I need to take away 8 in order to make it 8 less than that number. Now we can go ahead and do our evaluation. They told us they wanted us to evaluate this for x is -3, so if we do -3 minus 8, well, let me just come on over here. -3 plus a -8 would give us -11, right? Because subtracting 8 is the same as adding a -8. The next problem, the difference between the number and 1. So now this little keyword we're dealing with here is the difference. So the difference is just to subtract in the order the information's given to us here. The difference between the number and -1 would just be the number x and -1. So we want the difference between us. So here, this subtraction sign here, that's my difference. And here's my -1, okay? So the difference, that's this negative here, and that -1 also needs a negative to go in right there. Now if we do our evaluating for x is -3, -3 minus -1, -3 minus -1, well that's the same thing as -3 plus 1, which would give us -2. Be very mindful on this one with these parentheses here. We wouldn't want to write down x minus -1. We don't want those two negative signs sitting there next to each other without the parentheses to separate them out. Okay. Our last one, subtract -6 from the number. So this is another situation where I'm going to have the number x, and from that number I'm going to subtract -6. So I've got the number, and from that I'm going to subtract. Here's my subtract. And what am I subtracting? I'm subtracting -6. Another situation where I need both of those negatives hanging in there. So now let's do our evaluating. -3 goes into the x spot, minus -6. That's going to be the same thing as -3 plus 6, which would equal 3 for our final answer.